Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Omni viewer, and I'm here to just quickly share my thoughts on episodes 2 and 3 of ULTRAMAN BLAZAR. Just to be clear up front, I don't intend to review every single individual episode of this series as it happens. I more intend to review any very important episodes or episodes that really stand out to me. I'm going to keep watching it, but I'm not going to make videos unless a particular episode really leaps out. But that being said, I also wanted to adhere to the 3-episode rule that I usually do with serialized Japanese media. And also, luckily for me, this is the point where Earth Garon shows up. And Earth Garon was one of the main things that caught my eye about this series. But anyway, first things first, how was episode 2? Because episode 2 introduced a fan favorite kaiju in the form of Gedos. And yeah, episode 2 is good. This is where we actually establish the team. We already met Gento, but now we're meeting everyone else. And I mean, we don't necessarily know everything about them just yet, but right off the bat, they click. They feel like they can naturally form a fun, interesting group to follow. One that would be on par with the sort of teams we usually see in the best entries of the Ultra series. Now, again, we don't necessarily know everything about them, but we get enough of a sense of how they're going to interact together, and also the fact that Gento establishes they're not going to be strictly military. They are going to have slightly more of an organic, not necessarily friendship kind of thing, but definitely more in the vein of we're working together as a team, almost more sports-like, I guess you could call it. But, well, we'll see how that goes. Even so, it's established across these 2 episodes that Gento will still be a very serious military man when he's dealing with other parts of the military. But as far as the team itself goes, I think they're going to be good characters to follow, if they get proper development. The groundwork has been laid, which makes me think that they will be interesting, and in fact one of them gets highlighted a bit further in episode 3, and I'll get to her in a moment. But for right now, we still only just have the foundation. What is built on top of that remains to be seen. But the reason most people talk about this episode is because of Gedos, who is surprisingly popular even for his brief appearance. And why is he so popular? Well, that Ichthian design is certainly a huge part of it. He has a very interesting look that's definitely Piscine, but also not quite like any other Piscine kaiju we've seen in the Ultra series before. He also has a unique ability with that weird anglerfish lure that's really not a lure, it's more of a whip he can shoot out. And yes, I know there are people who are having fun with that feature in ways that are not exactly family friendly. So that's probably another draw. There's the tee-hee, look at what it looks like factor. But I also think another factor could be that he's actually got mythology to him. Bazanga in the first episode and Taganular in the 3rd episode, they're interesting designs and they're interesting portrayals, but they also don't really have much mythology to them. They just show up, cause damage, and they need to be destroyed. Gedos has mythology. He is a being that was already known about long before, and he might, mind you I said might, be a hint of where the kaiju are coming from in this series. There are some images in the opening title sequence that kind of hint at some of these monsters being ancient creatures, because they show like classic Japanese art styles rendering them before you see them appear as live action. It might be a hint. Or maybe not. But either way, the fact that he actually provides a bit more insight into what the world is like. But either way, the fact that he has a bit more of a connection to the world building is another significant factor. And then of course there's the way he's defeated, which has got to be one of the craziest ways that any monster has ever been defeated in the Ultra series. They just go full cartoon logic as Gedos is trying to escape and have Blazar turn his lance, his energy lance, into an energy fishing rod, complete with the sound of the reel going zzz, 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 as he's pulling him back up. It's crazy. Can't wait for him to teach this move to the next Ultra hero, Ultraman Looney, but we will see when that happens. I'm kidding, it's not gonna happen. I don't think they're ever gonna go that far. Or will they? But then we get episode 3, and like I said, this does provide a little bit more insight into one particular character, the character of Omni, Omni Minami specifically. She was introduced as someone that we know is physically capable because we first meet her in a dojo doing her karate practice. And she is the first one to pilot Earth Garon, and according to the different trailers, apparently that's going to be her regular job. They say they're going to do cycles with the piloting, but the trailers hinted that Omni is going to be the most frequent pilot at the very least. Now, we get a good sense that she's a little bit unsure of herself. She's not used to working on a team where everybody is treated as equal, and it's kind of throwing her, but she's also kind of enjoying the fact that her opinion is now valued by someone who would otherwise be a superior. That being said, though, we don't necessarily see the full extent of her character as yet. Like I said, the second episode laid the foundation. Later episodes, if they do things right, will build on top of that. This built a little bit for her. It didn't necessarily build a lot, but there's enough to make me think that there is more to come. So kudos to the episode for that. But what about Earth Garon himself? Like I said, he was the main reason I was interested in this series, because he was apparently going to be sort of a co-lead with Blazar. And the design kind of reminded me of Kiryu, who is one of my favorite Mechagodzilla depictions. I think he kind of shares the top spot with the original Mechagodzilla. So Earth Garon had me intrigued. And I at least wanted to do these reviews up to his debut, which I figured was going to be fairly early. Well, he made his debut in episode 3, and I have mixed opinions. On the one hand, he makes an impressive entrance with the dramatic backlighting reminiscent of the Heisei Godzilla movies, the way in which he lights up, and of course, when he's actually in a fight, he puts up quite a fight. Now, that being said, I do kind of feel that his presence in the episode was a bit anticlimactic, because the second episode kind of set things up in a way that you thought the series was going to go in a particular direction, and this third episode doesn't really follow up on that. It only follows up on it to a certain point. The second episode ends with the command coming down to the team, which is officially called Scarred, that they need to use Earth Garon to defeat a kaiju before Ultraman Blazar does. It kind of seems like the series is going for something of a middle ground between your classic depictions of Ultraman and a depiction like Ultraman Nexus, where like the original Ultraman series, the very first one from 1966, introduced the question where the Science Patrol eventually got to a point of asking, why are we even doing this when we've never beaten a monster ourselves? Ultraman always steps in and saves the day, so what are we even doing? Yeah, it was a pretty profound episode, actually, for the series. Nexus, meanwhile, went so far as to say that mankind not only doesn't think it needs Ultraman, it outright rejects him and views him as an enemy. This is kind of going for a middle ground, where they're seeing Ultraman Blazar not so much as an enemy, but certainly as competition, and they don't want to fall into the trap of relying on him to defeat the monster every time it shows up. And of course, the unspoken threat that comes with the Order is that if they fail, if they take Earth Garon, fight a kaiju, and they lose and Ultraman Blazar has to step in anyway, that could mean trouble for Scarred. I mean, why would they keep him around if they can't win, right? So you think that's setting up further conflict, because the leader of Scarred is the host of Ultraman Blazar. So he's going to be walking this fine line of wanting his team to succeed, but also knowing he needs to let Blazar step in when things get dire. And the episode where Earth Garon is finally introduced doesn't quite go as far as it could have. Like I said, Earth Garon puts up a good fight against Teganular before getting knocked down, and Gento has to get out of the cockpit to do the action that will reactivate him, which requires pulling a lever on the outside rather than inside the cockpit. That feels like a very serious design flaw. But whatever, it gets him out of the cockpit so he can transform into Blazar, but he doesn't pull the lever. Earth Garon still does contribute to the fight because he launches rockets from his tail, which, by the way, means his tail is actually functional, but at the same time, it kind of feels like... I guess part of what makes it feel weird is that even though he knows that turning into Blazar is the best move to defeat the monster, he also just kind of abandons Omni inside a useless tin can. Maybe he figures she'll be safe in there, but it doesn't really feel like it was a move he really thought through. I expected him to be at least like, no, let me do this first, and then have the wrist device sort of force his hand, sort of like it did in the first episode. And maybe we'll see that further on, but it didn't happen in this episode. But then there's the ending, in which, after Blazar basically defeats Teganular more or less on his own, and that whole thing is taken care of, we get the very last scene in which we learn Earth Garon performed up to standards, and apparently there are no consequences for failing to fulfill that order. None at all. Unless they're coming in episode 4. But that feels... Can you see how that doesn't feel like it's really building on what came beforehand? The second episode ended with a direct command to use this robot and defeat the monster before this weird alien giant that's shown up. They didn't do that, but that's apparently okay. It's... that's why I called it anticlimactic, because there was a setup, but there wasn't a payoff. So, I don't know if that's a bad sign. It's not necessarily. Maybe in the next episode, we will learn that there were consequences. They just took a while to come down through the chain of command or whatever. Or maybe it's just going to be steadily built up over the course of the series. I mentioned that the very first Ultraman show brought up the question of what good is the Science Patrol in a world where Ultraman exists? But let us also not forget, it didn't ask that question until very late in the series. It was like final quarter of the series, I believe. So I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if it took a long time for the consequences to snowball, if you will. But we will see. Ultimately, I don't think I'm disappointed with Earth Garon, but I definitely hope they make better use of him in the future. After all, there's a promise he's going to be fighting alongside Ultraman, not just coming in to get the tar beaten out of him so Ultraman can come in and finish the job. I'm looking forward to seeing that, especially. I still think he looks cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can actually do, and if he can actually score a win on his own. But for now, it was kind of a mixed debut for me. But I'm not giving up on the series. Like I said, I'm going to keep watching it. I'll pop back in for reviews like this if there's an episode that really stands out to me. But for now, I'm just going to let it rest as it is. 3-episode rule. If it doesn't lose me by the 3rd episode, I'm going to stick with it. Well, it hasn't lost me, so I will. And that's where I stand right now. So if you've been following along with the series as well, feel free to leave your thoughts down below. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.